With the EV credits gone and fear of tariffs fading, auto dealers in the United States need to get creative. It's all about profit margin these days, as 84% of all vehicles manufactured in America are trucks and SUVs. Stick shifts are going the way of the white elephant, and motorcycles just aren't as popular as they used to be. Find out more about the auto industry's prognosis for 2026 as we interview Kevin Tynan of the Presidio Group on this episode of Future Proof.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here, and with us today is Kevin Tynan from the Presidio Group. He's the guy who predicted the auto bailouts years ago. He got some nasty grams for it at the time, but then guess what? He was right. And Kevin has put a whole bunch of work into the Presidio Research 2026 year ahead outlook for the auto industry. And it's a very interesting take, Kevin. I like that you start off right out of the bat pointing out that these incentives are gone. So the EV, electric vehicle incentives, and also the fear of tariffs. And those two drivers are gone now, which is something significant, right? Take us through the beginning of the report and what you found.
You know what, Eric, and thanks for having me. But the interesting thing about the end of the EV subsidies, and I have been talking about this for a year. This was sort of my other, I wouldn't call it a prediction, but as long as EVs remained unprofitable, which they are for virtually every automaker,
Right.
it was going to be difficult adoption wise, right? So what's happening now is that I think, and I talk about this in the report, where for the past 13 plus years, we've seen this mix shift to truck from car.
Hmm.
And that has been the earnings driver for the auto manufacturers and for the dealers. So when you can, even in the compact classes, like a compact crossover, if you can sell one of those for 36,000 and not have to sell a $26,000 car, your revenue and profit contribution was a net positive. So
Right.
as we've gone through that and cycled through that for the past 13 years, really since 2013, we've gotten to 84% truck. The domestic manufacturers are basically tapped out at 100% truck,
Wow.
98, 97% truck. And the way to get the consumer to pay more for a vehicle had to be new technology, which was supposed to be electrification. Say, okay, we're maxed out as far as truck goes. That was the earnings driver for the past decade plus. The next thing is going to be look at all this new, clean sheet technology, all these wonderful things that this can do. Pay a little bit more for it. The consumer says, sure, we love this new tech. Here's a couple more bucks, here's some more margin, and we can continue this walk up in terms of transaction prices. So the failure, if that's the right word, of electrification or that transition to electrification, not only is bad for the sunk investment of the automakers, what I'm saying is like, okay, now what? Right? How do we go more truck? We're 84% as an industry, and there's automakers that are 98, 99%, the domestic specifically. So that's my concern, is how do we continue to move up market in terms of price, power, and margin integrity? And then you got to consider we're going to throw in a couple extra bucks in terms of tariffs this year, right? So now transaction prices go even higher without the consumer seeing that technological benefit.
Hmm. And when you're talking about this 84% or 98, you're talking about of the margin that the companies are making. Is that right? So it's not
No, I'm
84%.
saying what I'm saying is when you look at US auto sales, and it was 16.2 million in 2025, 84% of those are some form of truck.
No
And
kidding. What?
yeah, so the last time that was 50-50, and that's why I say the past 13 years, was 2013. We were 50% truck, 50% car. And
Wow.
because of the margin and revenue advantages of selling a truck versus a car, the manufacturers really pushed that the industry in that direction. Again, like I said, even on the compact space, it's the same basic utility, same vehicle, maybe even the same platform, but you can put more content in it. It's bigger. You can charge more for it and make more margin on it. So that's been the driver of earnings. And what I'm saying is we're kind of at the end of the runway with the industry being 84% truck already. Right. And I talk
Wow.
about 99, 98% for Ford, GM, and Stellantis, the Chrysler Jeep Dodge, Jeep, Ram brands, like Ford has one car left, Mustang. That's it. There's no Fusion, Fiesta, Focus, right? All those
Wow.
things are gone. Even for General Motors, there's two Cadillacs and the Corvette. No Malibu, no Cruise, right? All these things that were 20, $25,000 vehicles don't exist anymore because the financial benefit of selling an Equinox, right, or a Blazer, right, was better, and you just move, subtly, you just move the consumer in that direction.
Wow. And you're including SUVs, right, in a truck? Because
Yeah,
that's what everyone's buying is the SUVs. No one's buying the sedans anymore. Very
right,
few people are buying the small compact cars. I did not know that. The Focus is gone, the Fusion is gone, the
right.
Fiesta is gone. They're all gone. I did not
Yeah,
know
and I
that.
talk and I talk and I talk about this in my presentation when I deal with companies or present for status dealer associations. There's 10 or now 11 because Chevrolet Malibu is gone. There's 11 nameplates that Ford, GM, and the Chrysler brand, Stellantis now, sold in 2016. Now, I use 2016 because that was the highest volume year in US history, 17.5 million vehicles. So the
Wow.
three domestic manufacturers sold 1.1 million of compact and mid-sized cars below the industry average in 2016. None of those 11 nameplates even exist anymore. So it wasn't
Wow.
that they couldn't sell them. It was we don't want people buying our bottom of the market, probably unprofitable vehicles. We need to trade those unprofitable cars for a profitable SUV, even if it's a compact SUV or a pickup truck. And that's the way industry, and that has orchestrated, that was the plan, that's the strategy. It's not about
Wow.
selling vehicles, Eric. It's about being profitable when selling vehicles.
Wow. And I'm looking at this chart, and folks, if you want to see this chart, go to LinkedIn, look up Kevin Tynan. That's Tynan. And it's just a couple posts. The second to last post is this report. And if you click on that, you get a bunch of charts and graphs. And I'm looking at the new vehicle volume and retail revenue in the US. And it's an amazing chart because the revenue pool you see kind of goes up and down and up, and then it goes way up in the last 3 years, 4 years, 2022 through 2025. But the unit volume goes down and then way down. That must have been around the time they made this decision to start really pushing hard on the trucks. And now it's kind of going back up again, and the profitability, the revenue is up, but it's almost all trucks, right?
Right. And that's the thing. I don't like to talk about just volume in a vacuum because that's easy to manipulate, right? Give things away, drop prices and you can sell, but are they good sales?
Right.
So what I like to look at is what I call the revenue pool. Take the volume and take the price. And that's what's going to drive one of those two things, or the combination of those two things are going to drive the revenue pool. So the first thing you want to do is make the revenue pool larger, and then you want the profit mix of that pool to be richer as well. So the example I give a lot, Eric, is this, right? And I take General Motors just as an example. Back in 2016, the strategy was, or the selling dynamic was, we'll sell three Chevrolet Cruze for, and let's call it $20,000, and let's say we'll be generous. They break even and they sell one Chevrolet Silverado pickup truck at $60,000 at 20% operating margin. So they've sold four vehicles, right? They've booked $120,000 in revenue and $12,000 in profit.
All
This
from the truck.
world is forget the Chevrolet Cruze. Let's sell one more Silverado. So now we've only sold two vehicles, but it's the same 120,000 in revenue, and we just doubled our operating profit to $24,000. Now the problem is people look at that and they go, GM sales are down 50%. they're screwing it up, right? They're not doing well. And it's like, no, it's exactly the opposite, is that they're
Wow.
getting rid of the low margin or no margin or negative margin vehicles to sell the profitable things. So that's why it's important not to look at volume in a vacuum, because the price matters. The margin profile of those vehicles matters. Selling a Chevrolet Cruze at $20,000 is not the same thing. It counts as one unit, and so does one Silverado,
Right.
but a very, very different, revenue and profit dynamic. And that's why you're in business.
Right. Well, and then speaking of tariffs and why some people think we need them, you look at China and what they're producing. I saw that news report where the chairman of Ford was out there saying that his visit to China was the most humbling experience of his life. Did you see that one? I'm presuming you did,
Yeah,
because he
yeah, Jim
saw
Farley.
how automated the factories were. He saw how much they're able to deliver at a price point, and he basically realized that we're way behind the eight ball here. That's a very different margin over there. They're talking about mass quantities of electric cars and relatively cheap cars, as opposed to here, we're only selling high end. So, do tariffs protect us from that, or what's happening there?
Oh yeah, that's the idea. Now there's two issues when I look at it, with regards to China. One of them is they have spent decades building the supply chain,
Right.
right? So it's a different set of materials. In fact, a lot more materials that go into making an EV, about 6 times what goes into an internal combustion vehicle.
Hmm.
But they've spent decades buying the mines and perfecting the processing of those things. So they control the supply chain, first of all. The other thing is, the way I think about it is, this is not Ford versus BYD or XPeng or any other Chinese automaker. It's the government subsidizing their vehicles versus other governments subsidizing their vehicles. So
Right.
while you may look at, and I've done the math on this too, Eric, is that if you look at what China has given their automobile manufacturers in direct subsidies, which is
Hmm.
something that we won't do, right? We will not give GM, Ford money directly to produce electric vehicles. We'll give something to a subsidy to the consumer, or we'll invest in infrastructure, but direct subsidies, we haven't done it to that extent. But China, going back to 2008, 2009, when they wanted to start the shift to electrification, over the time has basically given $18,000 per electric vehicle directly to the consumer. So if you think about that, you can sell a $40,000 vehicle, right, for 22,000, half, basically.
Wow.
And now the consumer looks at that and they say, wow, not only is this a good vehicle, is it a great vehicle for $22,000. Meanwhile, you're comparing it to a $40,000 US made vehicle, or European, or Japan or South Korean made vehicle, because that subsidy isn't included in it. So it's not automaker versus automaker, it's government versus government. And
Right.
nobody's willing to spend like that.
Yeah, well, they're doing the same thing in the solar market, if I understand it correctly. They're investing heavily in subsidies in companies that make solar panels. And at a certain point, like how do you combat that? I mean, it's the same issue with labor prices, for example, in other places. Although, not to get off topic here, but in recent years, labor prices have gone up in places like India and China and other places, where the Philippines, Malaysia, even, where we've relied upon that. But getting back to the auto vehicles, those numbers are amazing. But then I look at myself when I drive in, drop the kid off at school, for example, I see SUV, 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 truck, truck, sedan, SUV, SUV, sedan, like, because
Right, right.
that's what they're producing.
Well, and to your point, right? Labor costs are always going up. Everybody wants to make more money next year than they made this year, right? And now you multiply that mindset by everybody who touches a material, a tool, sits at a
Right,
cubicle, like so all your input costs are always inflationary. So
yeah,
what do you do as a manufacturer? Again, you have and not just automobiles, but you have two choices. You're either going to produce and sell more stuff, or you're going to sell the same amount or less stuff, but earn more doing it, right?
right,
And the choice has been the latter, is that our enterprise gets more expensive. So is it easier to sell more stuff profitably, or is it easier to really put in the high margin options and content into a vehicle or any product and say, this is what you're paying more for. You're paying, that's where we're making our margin is on these other things. And that's been the orchestrated strategic decision, like I said,
Right.
for the past 13 years. We'll
Right.
sell fewer, but we'll make more money doing it.
Right. Well, it makes sense. I mean, these are business decisions. These are for-profit organizations. They're looking to make money, and they've got the whole process nailed down. You made a couple interesting comments about the Chinese and building out their supply chains. I would imagine there have been some scratched heads and some sharpened pencils in the last few years, finding new supply chains for our vehicles too, right? And just having a much greater focus on supply chain dependency when you have things like tariffs, when you have things like wars around the world and adversaries selling you important goods. I mean, the whole thing of the raw minerals, like the rare earths, for example, that's another thing. So I'm guessing a lot of our companies are paying a lot of attention to supply chain now, right?
Right. And that's the thing, you hear about um, supply chains and national security. And in the auto space, you kind of think about it like, oh, well, if there's a lot of Chinese built vehicles driving around, they're sending data back to China. And I'm saying, well, it's not only that, it's the fact of the matter is that if those rare earths are not simply used for automobile, but the defense industry and all these other things, if that spigot is turned off, right, where there's your national security issue is like now we can't build the things we need for protection for those other industries, for the defense industry and things like that. So it's not simply about the data being sent back to China, about, me walking down the street in my neighborhood, right? It's about they control the supply chain. And not only that, obviously it's a security issue, but that's why I'm saying that if the electric vehicle segment in the US is not profitable now, it won't be until we've put our own in place. Because at the end of the day, we're calling China and saying, hey, we need materials
Right.
for our electric industry, right? So, and it's
Right.
like they decide. And if they decide that they're taking their ball and going home, well, then you don't get the product, you don't get the materials. And in that environment, you don't determine pricing, things don't get
Right.
cheaper in that kind of situation.
Yeah, well, right. You've lost control and you also have
Right.
sunk costs because you had a plan to build these cars and all of a sudden you have the rug pulled out from underneath you. I mean, that's not a small thing. Let's face it, for especially for the cars of today, the sort of jack of all trades auto mechanic is kind of fading because of how
Yeah.
specialized these engines are. So in many cases, you really probably should go to the dealer, and that's a big line item for them, right? In terms of revenue, just all the
Oh,
billable hours and fixing all these things. That so like, do you have some numbers on how much you can make from the dealership side? I mean, from the sales side versus the service side and all that?
and I actually just put these two slides in my I'm in Detroit tomorrow doing a presentation. I just put these two slides in. When you look at it, um, new vehicle sales for a full line dealership. And when I say full line, I mean they're doing new vehicle sales, used vehicle sales, parts, service, finance, insurance. So
Right.
basically four businesses under one roof, right? So if you look at a full line dealership, new vehicle sales will represent 49% of the revenue,
All right.
right? Because that's you're talking about a $50,000 average these days on the number of vehicles you sell.
Right.
But as far as gross profit, that number drops to about 20% of the gross profit total.
Hmm.
And what we call fixed ops, the parts and service business, is the opposite. It might be 14% of the revenue, but it's about 40 plus percent, 44% of the profitability. Because the difference, Eric, is your front end gross on a new vehicle might be 5 cents on the dollar. Your service bay is getting you 50 cents on the dollar,
Right.
right? So now what I've been telling dealers is that your two opportunities now as the new vehicle market starts to get oversupplied and it starts to see pricing power go away and margin and what's the next thing and we're not sure what that is and we've invested a lot, and this is the manufacturer speaking, we've invested a lot in electrification and now we've kind of written that off. So not only was that expensive financially, but it was an opportunity cost and focus of investing in other things and developing
Mhm.
internal combustion or hybrid or plug-in hybrid technology that didn't happen in that period. So now we're in this little window of like, we got to catch up on some of these other things. So in
Right.
that period where it's going to be difficult for dealerships to do new vehicle front end gross, I'm saying used vehicles and parts and service are going to be where they pivot to more than offset, the difficulties or the challenges that they're going to face in the new vehicle market.
Yeah. Well, and vehicles are lasting longer too. And I'm old enough to remember built-in obsolescence and when that whole thing came. And I think we've pretty much rooted that out of the industry. Is that about right? They're not doing that kind of stuff
Well,
anymore.
remember 100,000 miles was like, forget it,
Right. Right.
that it's
Right.
on its last legs,
Right.
right?
Now it's 200,000,
Oh yeah,
they go a
easy.
long
Big
way.
difference. Big difference. Yep.
Yeah, well that's good stuff. I mean, the quality is there. I mean, I've got a Subaru and I've got a we've talked about it before, a little Mazda Miata 6 speed, manual transmission. That's the other thing is manual is going away too, right? I mean, how many
No doubt.
manual transmission cars are there out there anymore? Like one per company, if that?
Yeah, you could probably get one in the Mustang still. Corvette doesn't do it anymore. A lot of the high-end stuff. My son works for Rolls-Royce, and obviously that's owned by BMW. So he's got a little Z4 with a manual transmission, but that's going away, I think, in the spring also. The
Oh,
last of those. So
that's so
yeah,
sad. I hate
it is
that.
sad.
I
Yeah,
hate, I
I've
love
been talking
manual.
about getting something with a manual for the just to have because they're extinct.
That's really sad. There's something very special about controlling the gears that you're in. I mean, especially for sports cars, but for any cars. I mean, I just like that. And like my Subaru has little push button things. That's not the same. I want a clutch. I want to be going like this. It just feels good to do that. Well, we got one segment coming up left here with Kevin Tynan. Check out his report on LinkedIn. It's linked right there. It's also linked at the Presidio Group's website. Uh, I love learning about cars. I love learning about what's happening. We'll talk about some of the new technology that the dealerships can use in our final segment here to stay on top of things because you got to stay agile, you got to stay focused. A friend of mine here in Pittsburgh, he got a super sweet deal. He bought a two-story, two-bedroom house for $50,000 last year. But like right after he said I want it, someone else came in and offered like 70 and 80. Now they're all jacking up. So you got a super sweet deal. But you used to be able to get a house for 50 grand. Now it's a car for 50 grand. I mean, that is a just shocking disparity in terms of what it used to be priced at. But now the dealers can do some pretty interesting things. I mean, you can do customer segmentation. You can be very focused on your marketing efforts, on taking care of your tip jar, as they say, and even technologies that will identify what kind of car is coming on the lot, what kind of pocketbook this person might have. So there's some pretty clever things that dealers can do to optimize their sales process, right?
And look, Eric, what I say is the only thing that you're as a dealer you're is not coming back is affordability, right?
Right.
And you talked about $50,000. We saw the average transaction price for December, but the other thing I also look at is the average MSRP, which was over $53,000 in December. Now you get the consumer says, well, I'm not paying that. And you get some discounting in there that brought the number down to closer to 50, 51 in December. But think about that, right? And especially as automakers, the manufacturers in 2026 pass along some of those tariff costs, which I think a lot of them were absorbed in 2025, where they said, look, we're gonna eat this for this year, but that's not sustainable. So now as those costs get along, think about that. And our friends at Cox Automotive, who came out with the 53,000 MSRP number, are saying, look, that number could be $2,500 in 2026. So think about that. We're going to have an average MSRP $55,000 in this country before we know it. And maybe even in
Wow.
2026. It's incredible, right?
That's crazy.
So the one thing I'm telling dealers is like, look, there's no way back. There's somebody can sell a $20,000 whatever, but they're going to control the volume on that because it's unprofitable. I just did the math on Ford globally. I was trying to do it on their EV unit, the Model E business unit, but I did it on them globally. Ford's cost of goods, because I hear this all the time. Oh, if somebody could make a $30,000 EV, they'd sell them all day. And I'm saying, who cares? If you're losing money on it, you don't want to sell it all day,
Right.
right? So I think about that $30,000 line, like, oh, you could sell cars for $30,000 all day. It's like, of course. So I just did the math on Ford. Their cost of goods sold in the third quarter, we're waiting for the fourth quarter report, was $37,500. So how
Wow.
many $30,000 cars can you sell, right? Now you can do it, but you're not doing it for profitability. What you would be
Right.
doing is saying like, hey, we want an entry product to pull in, young buyers. Somebody graduates college, they need their first vehicle, they want something new. We have something for you around $30,000. We are knowingly losing money on and doing that, hoping that someday you'll be loyal to us, which there's no guarantee. But,
Wow.
from a shareholder's perspective, it's, hey, that's not hard math to figure out that that's bad
Right.
business,
Wow.
right? So, so this idea that affordability can come back or will come back, or that automakers should move down market, it just doesn't
It's not going to
reconcile.
happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I say, in that sense, for the dealerships, right, in your service bays, and it could be scheduling more efficiently,
Right.
uh,
Anything.
you know,
Right. A
uh,
good point.
yeah, parts ordering in advance, when the appointment, like there's so many technologies, and we see it at the Presidio Group. We have a division that does automotive technology investment banking. We see these companies from the early days, and it's amazing what's out there. And it could be mobile service for a dealership, right? Just, hey, for the easy things, brake jobs, oil changes, we'll do it in your driveway, right?
Right.
There's so many options, but again, it's not going to come because the consumer's paying over MSRP or
Right.
margins get super wide again. It's going to come because you're running your business more efficiently, more creatively, and you're finding 10 places where you can wring out 50 basis points, not
Right.
one place where you're going to wring out 500 basis points.
Right, that's right. You got to look for the small wins, basically. And I think you're exactly right. There are so many efficiency gains to be had now with technologies on ordering, on scheduling, all sorts of little things that you didn't think were costing your organization too much. But when they add up, you're like, wow, we just saved a whole heck of a lot of money. I'll close on one thing. One thing I've noticed, and I didn't see this in the report, but I may have missed something. Motorcycles. I don't see a lot of motorcycles out there. I don't see a lot of motorcycle ads. I don't see really any movement on that front at all. Am I missing something or what's going on there?
And it's a shame. I just think that as that transition to truck from car, right, we're driving bigger, scarier things. And safety and motorcycle, and I'm a motorcycle guy. It's just, there's parts of the country where it still makes sense. And there's parts that it doesn't. The other thing too, Eric, I would say is this, as a hobby, right? Because that's essentially what it is here. We don't, for all intents and purposes, our gasoline prices are low enough that we commute with cars and trucks. You
Yeah.
go to Europe, and because you're paying the equivalent of $10 a gallon, you see a lot more scooters, motorcycles as commuters. We don't do that here. So it's a hobby, and same thing, right? The enterprise gets bloated. You got to move up market. You got to charge more. It becomes a very expensive
Mm.
hobby while being probably one of the more dangerous things you can do.
Right.
And I think that's why, you see a lot of, Polaris is a good example where they're doing off-road vehicles. They're doing jet skis kind of thing. And the off-road market and the ATVs is kind of taken because you're not on the road, right? You're not competing with all these giant SUVs to get out there and feel that freedom of being on your motorcycle.